All right, we'll do it that way.
All right, cool.
Okie doke.
All right. So we'll start off. Heather MacDonald. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're running for and why you're running and that kind of thing.
Sure thing. So my name is Heather MacDonald. I live in Camp Hill. My current job is in real estate. I actually work for a small local company, Joy Daniels Real Estate Group. And so it's like a mile from my house and work from home, that whole jazz. So that's my current days. I'm running for the 87th district. Currently, that is East Pennsboro, Camp Hill Borough, Hampden Township, and a tiny little sliver of Silver Spring. And of course, that could change with redistricting. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But that's our district as we know it now. And so I actually ran in the district last year. I always tell people I kind of had an idea that I wanted to maybe join a campaign. I did a lot of trainings to become maybe a campaign worker, something like that. But I just kept waiting to attach myself to a campaign that was going to knock my socks off, somewhere that I was like super attracted to. And it never came because I think I was looking for a candidate. Our candidates in Cumberland County in the last 5 years have been mind-blowingly amazing, across the board, different people. I was looking for someone that could maybe talk about things. Well, speaking of the dog, that might be a little bit more speaking to what I've gone through. So I've never really seen a politician talk about poverty, be a woman, be someone a millennial. Remington, I think it's a package being delivered.
That Amazon truck, man. It's my dog.
I don't even think I ordered anything. So
order.
I know. It's usually like something boring, like paper towels or something.
Right.
But my neighbors must think that I like have like this grand budget, but it just looks like big boxes of toilet paper, Yeah. So last year, and I was looking for someone that could maybe speak to something that I was used to, and I didn't see it, which was in the back of my mind thinking, it's someone knocking on my door, which is unusual.
Oh yeah. Do you want to go check that out? Sure.
Yeah, let's pause in case it's a neighbor. I never know who needs something.
Yeah. Go
okay. I'll be right back.
Everybody. All right, Blondie, it's just a dog on the computer.
It's something better. It was my child.
Knocking on the door or someone coming to see your child?
He has a job on Wednesday mornings where he goes to a farm in Halifax and he helps do organic farming.
Yeah. I've known other people who have done that.
Yes. So he gets a ride home. Halifax is far. We have an early morning drive. I take him. It's a lovely drive, actually, all the way through Marysville if you choose to go that way. And then I have a quiet drive back. I try to like catch up on podcasts or something on the way back. So he gets a ride home. So he's early. So that caught me off guard.
There you go.
It's hot out. So it's probably for the best.
Yeah.
Rather than going. So last year was going to join a campaign, couldn't find one that spoke to me in particular. And so it kind of percolated for a while. Maybe I should run. And so I thought if I can do the paperwork, I'll run. And then I did. And then I thought, well, if I could find the right email address, I'll keep going. So all the doors kept opening and I was like, oh my gosh, it's happening. So we went through the doors and honestly, it was a campaign of one. I walked out my door with my petition. I knocked on 400 doors. I tried to figure out what people cared about to see if they meshed with what I cared about. Cause my story is specific. I don't expect people to wholly relate to someone who was a teenage mother, poverty and worked her way out. But the ideas that we all share, I think, are universal. So COVID came and that changed things a little bit because I had never had social media before. Last March was when I started social media. Yeah. It is an education. And 2020 was a weird time to learn it. So
kudos for you for keeping on with it that long.
I know. It was, you know what it was? It wasn't that I saw anything particularly bad or unattractive there. I just didn't have time. When you're a single mom, you just legit don't have time. Sometimes you're like, I had to shower. And so could I really choose that versus like posting something? Right. Yeah. And then inherently, I'm not a very interesting person. So I don't really think, to find things. So last year I ran knowing I was going to lose. I didn't have, delusions of grandeur. I just thought that there had to be a place to start. And that seemed like a good place to talk to people, knock on doors. It's a scary thing to knock on doors, but if you can do it and actually emotionally be present for their answers, you will learn everything you need to know, because honestly, behind every door, it's a different story, but the values are absolutely consistent. So this year, honestly, this is a dream team. I could have never dreamed when I not walked out my door with my clipboard by myself in 2020 that we could find ourselves in this place. We have an excellent team. It's not just me. Sarah's brilliant. She hates when I talk about her, but she's so smart. She's so organized. She's so ambitious. We have Jess, we have Trisha, we've got Rob, we've got all these different people, Allison, Hajir. Literally, people are coming from the West Coast, the East Coast, and coming, and we're finding each other. So it's really, really beautiful. And so I just think that different backgrounds are going to help. I think people coming from different places, and like Tara Shakespeare last year, hearing her specific story and hearing that. Nicole Miller last year, Brittany Rodas, Lindsay Drew. I think all of those stories, they're all different, but actually we all could sit there transfixed because we understand what they're saying. We inherently understand what we're talking about. And so I think having those voices in the room is incredibly important.
We need to get ourselves a PA squad.
Yeah, right?
PA squad. So we need.
Yeah, because what's the point of, because let's just say that we come together, and let's just say in Cumberland County, we flip the 87th. What's the point of me going there alone?
Right.
We need, it's my job to make sure that I'm being supportive to everybody else too, that we are all looking for each other and finding each other, because you can't do it alone. I mean, that much is true.
Yeah. It's yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, we'll get into some of these questions that we have here.
Yeah.
What are your feelings on the current districting guidelines, and what improvements would you make, if any at all?
Actually, there was just had a meeting about some redistricting stuff yesterday, and we were talking about I think sometimes experience has taught us to be a little pessimistic. I would think realistic about what could happen. Cumberland County is one of the fastest growing counties in all of Pennsylvania. So we know that the 87th district is going to change by numbers alone. Before you even take into strategy of whoever might be in charge, the numbers are going to change our district. So I'm prepared for whichever way we go. I think that the guidelines are great. We were talking yesterday about, well, what would happen if maybe Camp Hill got cut up or Hampden Township got caught up? And the person I was talking to said, well, they need to follow some guidelines about not cutting through different townships, municipalities. I'm like, Silver Spring is a sliver for us. So the guidelines are there, and they are just that. They are guidelines. People will follow them or not. They might guide them if they want to be guided, but it's a little bit absurd the way that we do the lines at all. The fact that the people in charge are in charge of keeping themselves there, and they hold that power to make it so that they can stay there, again, based on numbers alone, not based on anyone's voice, is a little absurd, but it is our reality. So for the 87th district, we are plowing ahead. We are just going to start campaigning, and no matter what happens, I mean, this is going to benefit Cumberland County as a whole. They could shift us, they could move us. We're just going to keep making sure that the Democrats are available to everybody. There's a little bit of hope with the transparency this year, as opposed to 10 years ago. So if we're going to find a silver lining, that would be it. But the timeline is so up in the air. We'll see how well that shakes out.
Yeah. And if you would end up in the legislature, are there can you think of any districting policies that are out there that you might champion or want to be part of, or think would be good to put in place to change the system a little bit?
I know it's that's a good question. I know that it's a little hokey to think that the citizens are always the answer to a lot of things. With a lot of things you ask, I'll always say citizen input, citizen board. That goes for a lot of different things: prescription drugs, things that I feel like we all like but that aren't getting passed, like gun violence prevention. It goes for redistricting as well. But I think that they are able to. It's a process that not a lot of people understand. I think if they understood it, they would care a lot more, but I don't think that that's unintentional. I think that it benefits them for people to not be very educated on it, because if they were, I think everyone would kind of rise up and say enough is enough. I think they'd get mad as hell if they knew that we just had Brian Sims on the show on Monday, and he said there are 750,000 more Democrats in Pennsylvania, but the gerrymandered state of our Commonwealth makes it so that the Republicans are actually 2 million more. And so they are actually representing 2 million more. It's not accurate. And so if we had transparency, one, there would be a sense of civic duty that would come into play, and everybody else could get involved. And then a citizens board would be very, very helpful. Can you imagine, pick your favorite citizen from Cumberland Valley Rising, send them in to be our spokesperson. We have enough people that care, but they're just not going to be heard.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, I do think when you talk to regular people, most people, it's a bipartisan thing. They want to
Yes.
see fair, like fair districts, is not a partisan issue, really,
Hmm.
or even the organization out there or anything. It is really both people on all sides wanting our districts to be fair and equal, and knowing that when you vote for a representative, everybody, like your vote is given the same weight as every other vote.
Amen. Yeah, because I always say to people, I think part of being a Democrat is that you want government to work. And I always tell my story of going through welfare, and everyone that voted Democratic in the last 10 years, you were voting for me. And so I can tell you that it seems a little bit abstract what you're doing, but I very much felt it. You helped keep my house warm. You helped keep me healthy. You helped give me food. And so all of those things are very real. So if people could actually tangibly understand that there's a sense of fairness that isn't there or could be taken away, I think that sense of fairness is bipartisan. I absolutely agree.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Just taking some notes.
Mm-hmm. It's very librarian of you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I mean, I feel that too. Being in the public schools,
Mm-hmm.
we're like you said, like on the front lines almost of what voters are doing, and legislators. And
You'll
everything. Yeah.
you'll feel
Speaking
it,
of
yeah.
that, then next question: what would you do to improve equity in our public schools? Which I imagine, coming from poverty too, you saw a lot of that with those issues as well. But even just
Mm-hmm.
along all of it, class, race,
Mm-hmm.
gender, we need that equity in schools.
Yeah. Let me start out from a personal standpoint. One is I'd like to give the context too that the poverty I felt was so specific to me because of the privilege I had before. When I lost the privilege, it was very apparent to me. There was a moment where I was a little indignant, where I was like, how dare you? Like, this isn't what I'm used to. And it's because you have this privilege that you are wrapped in, and you have it that you don't even realize. So the moment it was gone was very apparent to me. And the moment that I was rising out of poverty, it became very apparent that it was again available to me. And again, I couldn't even begin to feel some of the different inequities that other people feel. But throughout that, I was able to pinpoint some things that were helpful. We do have school funding that, depending on where you go, that they will actually go to community colleges. You can get funding through your local schools, Pell Grants, stuff like that. That is all very, very helpful. That I think until you need it, you don't know it's there. But because of that, you might not notice if it goes away. So we need to make sure. Pell Grants saved my life. Pell Grants are the reason that I was able to get a 2-year degree over 12 years. It took me 12 years to get a 2-year degree, but it was because I didn't stop. I stayed on it, one class per semester, when I could afford them. And Pell Grants were the way that I afforded them. So the things that are there, we cannot take our eye off of. I dread the day that I see a headline that sells Pell Grants or funding between the schools and higher ed is going to go away, because we can't let that happen. And then the other answer is, there is an issue, I think, that frustrates. Knocking on 400 doors, it was a common frustrating issue that sometimes as Democrats, and I'll be broad in this respect, we're frustrated that we are constantly playing defense. We have to stop rights being taken away from women. Like we're going backwards. No, wait. We have people trying to put things in place to make things unfair for people that are of the LGBTQ plus community. And we're sitting here wanting to move the ball forward. So right now where I'm sitting, I am watching, and I was watching it on a very local level on a Facebook page for the Camp Hill Borough the other day. When you see something like critical race theory, we are going to lose ground. If we don't first define what ground we're on, we could lose it. And right now we have an opposition who is working very hard to make things even worse. They're saying that, hey, any equity that you're trying to work on, we are going to reverse it and take you back farther. So we have a job of education to do. We have a job of defining the problem that I don't think is that is happening at an effective level right now. And so before we can even move the ball forward, we need to stop this aggressive push backwards. And so that's honestly where I feel like we're getting flooded right now, and we need to patch the ship before we even adjust the sails, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like that's totally like, being someone who works in public school, I want to be like, stop like like, so like, stop trying to justify it and apologize for it and say, this is the right thing to do. And this is why. And you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, and yeah, it's frustrating.
We need to raise the efficacy of our messaging. We need to stop taking on the verbiage of stuff that we don't agree with. We need to step outside of that. And honestly, I think that that comes like through the best with like the young generation, this TikTok generation. They are fearless, man. They will go after anything. They define the problem loudly. They don't give ground. And so I'm, as an elder, trying to catch up to them because they just aren't having it. They have never spent a day in their lives. I at least spent the first half of my education not having active shooter drills. That didn't start happening until I was in middle school. And so I had and I think people around my age of this generation do have that contrast. They've never had it and they have a chip on their shoulder about it, rightfully so. And now they're watching this ground be lost very effectively, I might add. I was just reading an article the other day that was talking about, you know, the Google trends and seeing critical race theory just rocket up. They have found an issue that people are, and it'll fade. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
You could do that. You could do the same with the, what was it? The caravan. The caravan.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. And they did
This
it.
is our, yes, this is the new caravan.
They've done it with LGBT stuff. You know, they ratchet.
Yes.
And the thing though that frustrates me is that we have that, like, you know, like it's rockets up and everybody talks about it, but and you're like, well, if we work it the right way, we can make positive change from it. But all
There's
it ever
ground.
does is just fall back to the status quo.
Exactly.
And that's exactly, yeah, that whole like we need to, yeah, I like the idea of don't take on the verbiage of the you know, the people saying this stuff. That's super important.
Yes. I mean, it's words do matter and being blunt about it, I think matters too. And I think it's like an Einstein quote. If you can't explain something simply, you can't actually explain it. And so I think we need to be able to step outside of this current tornado that will fade. It'll fade. It'll go the way of Obama's coming for your guns. The caravan's coming across the border.
Right.
It is the newest version. But at this point, we know the playbook. We know the playbook, and it's here. We're never going to fully stop it. And honestly, there might even be a kernel of truth to that fear of someone who isn't uneducated on the subject, who's going to project some things, or they're just flat out receiving misinformation. We need to educate before and honestly put a stop to this current flood before we can even move forward, in my mind. And it's going to happen again. So we need a playbook for every time it happens.
And that's what, and you know, as an educator, I always like what I always say too, and you can sort of speak, maybe you want to speak to this a little bit, is that for us to be able to do that in the classroom, we need our administrators, we need our legislators, we need our executive branch and everybody to stand behind us when we bring those things forward, when we try to educate on those fronts and we try to broaden kids' definitions and experiences and things. You know, we need to know that we're not gonna be left out hanging dry when someone protests it. You know what I mean? That's, you know, like that's something I always look for in a candidate, and you know, people I work with and things too. So
I mean, it's the same as any job. If someone came into real estate and tried to say, hey, you shouldn't put signs up anymore, I'd be like, you don't know what you're talking about. I do this every day. They sell houses. They get me to the end goal. But it's like someone coming in and saying, I know how to do your job. Pick your job. You don't want me to come in and tell you how to do your job. You don't want me. I have a new client who works at a cheese factory. If I went in there and told him, hey, you're doing cheese all wrong, he would be like, please leave. It's just not the way that it works. And so our teachers were heroes 365 days ago. We need to make sure that one, we're paying them, and two, that we're actually listening to them. And actually hearing politicians say we need to pay our teachers every single year was one of the first things that ever planted a seed in my mind that something wasn't right, because I was hearing it year after year, which was saying to me, I thought that we already agreed on this. I thought I voted for you and I thought you did it. But obviously that follow through was never happening. It was just the line that got applause. And so they recycled it every year. And I mean, that's going to come due. That bill will come due, and we don't have enough teachers because of a teacher shortage. That bill's going to come due, and we have teachers that aren't being paid enough, and they're not going to stay here. They'll go to a state that does pay them. And I don't blame them.
Or they're leaving the profession. That's a big issue now.
Yes.
There's so many jobs out there, and there's so many, the job market is so crazy that you're seeing a lot of that too. Because The
And
burnout.
the burnout is big, and it's a difficult job. You have to be emotionally available all day long. And it's not just from 9 to 3 or whatever the hours of your school are. It's then having to interact with parents. It's having to interact with step parents. It's having to interact with the administration. And then you add in this new tornado of people protesting and putting a microscope where there really doesn't belong. I think that is a very, very difficult profession. And honestly, I had to be a teacher for my high school age son during the pandemic. It was very difficult. I felt a lot of empathy for my friends who had school age children who had to be very, very involved in their schooling. When they get older, they're a little bit more autonomous, but I couldn't teach him woodshop. I couldn't teach him driver's ed. I couldn't teach him home ec. And so I think every age of kid felt the absence of having qualified teachers in their lives.
Yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, even as a teacher, I have 2 kids. They're close in age. They're not the twins or anything, but they're both 11. So they
Mm-hmm.
were in 4th grade, and even for me, like I was still in school teaching, and they're here, and it's a lot.
That's good to hear, though. That's
Yeah.
comforting. I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
phew.
no, trust me, even teachers had those, had hard time being.
Mm-hmm.
You're not supposed to be your kid's own teacher,
Right.
like I mean, I know there are homeschool people and they have great programs and they do stuff, but I think
Yeah.
for a lot of people that's just not how the dynamic does not work as
Yeah.
well.
And the environment, you're at the
People,
kitchen table.
yeah, right. It does for some people. I know that's their thing and they do a great job with it. But I think for a lot of people, it's a hard balance. All right, moving on. Healthcare. In your view, what are the top 3 healthcare issues that need to be addressed?
Well, let's go through 3 healthcare issues, but we also need to talk eventually about healthcare in general, not even the subcontext of the subcategories under healthcare. But the pandemic showed us the absurdity of our healthcare being tied to our jobs. It showed us the absurdity of a calendar year ending and a new deductible coming back around. I think that the best thing that came out of COVID is the contrast between what we were used to and what we accepted as regular and typical and what could be. And so I think that is one issue over there. Issues under healthcare, I think that need to be addressed. One, I mean, they're very Pennsylvania specific, which is kind of nice. Yeah. Air quality. I always say to people that when Jean Fauci ran in 2018, I think it was, she talked about air quality a lot because she was running for county commissioner. And I remember the first time I saw her at a forum talking about air quality, I kind of looked outside and I'm like, it looks good to me. Air quality is one of those things that you think you might be able to recognize in the form of smog or something like that. But actually, Pennsylvania has the 3rd worst air quality in the nation. We have smoke from wildfires out west reaching us now. And so that's one of those things that's not district specific. Pollution doesn't care about your district. It is going to go where it's going to go. So we need to have actual solutions to that. One is just addressing climate change in general, like we're talking about smoke traveling across the country, rain in China, all of that is going to all eventually reach Pennsylvania. Like we're on one globe. It's all going to be here eventually and vice versa.
Well, it's not like we're doing ourselves any favors with all the factory or all the warehouses.
Yes.
And we're already up there because of the warehouses and the trucking and everything. So
yes, I had an interview with someone from Portland the other day, and he said, "What's kind of uniquely special about your district? What's an issue that you guys care about?" And I say, it was kind of funny because he caught me off guard a little bit. I said, we are so fast growing here in Cumberland County. When I drive with my son, I'll say that all used to be farmland because we're so used to this growth. We assume this growth is happening everywhere, but it's not. Erie is seeing a population decline. Allegheny County is seeing a population decline. We're just used to watching all of this area pop up and be beautifully developed along the Carlisle Pike in and around Hampton Township and everything like that. But that is not a given. And so one of the things that's hyper specific to us is traffic, roads, and infrastructure. And all of that will tie back to warehouses. We have this beautiful hub right here, and we are central Pennsylvania. So we are central to a lot of different things, which means that we make sense for warehouses to be built here. One, stop giving them subsidies. We don't need to do that. We don't need to give petrochemical plants subsidies. We own the natural gas. It's not going anywhere. So stop subsidizing them. Stop subsidizing the warehouses. 2, because of the warehouses, we are going to have increased wear and tear on the roads, which means we need to have a special attention on them. And actually, I'll give credit to our current representative. He's Republican, Greg Rothman. He has gotten us a lot of grants for road development here. And so I think he's done a great job of putting that focus where it needs to be. But where that relates to air quality too is, planting trees along the corridor. It's making sure that we don't have these trucks come in here and not pay the actual price of the business that they're doing. And again, that leads to really rambling here, it leads to a bigger idea of climate change in general about the fossil fuel industry. They aren't currently paying the actual price of business in Pennsylvania. We are. Whenever they pollute and it causes us to experience severe storms, who fixes the roads after severe storms? PennDOT. Who pays for PennDOT? You and me. So there needs to be, joining RGGI, I know that's getting into something very specific. Governor Wolf wants us to join RGGI, which is a regional section of the northeast of the country that's going to band together to kind of have rules about cap and trade and limits to pollution. That's going to be helpful, and that'll help air quality. Sorry, that was a long answer for one thing.
It also shows that how different things tie together. You have now tied healthcare to climate, and that, it's
and warehouses.
Yes, and warehouses.
Yes,
it all does really tie together.
And then the warehouses relate to the roads, and the road relates to the Chick-fil-A, and then suddenly you're talking about
and
the borough meeting.
Have jobs. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yes. I think that whenever an area has something great, like Pennsylvania, we do have natural gas, and we're not going to click that off overnight. It's not practical. You need to know what that's worth. And what that's worth is that people are going to want to build their chemical plants here, and they're going to need to because of location. Again, Central PA, we have something great, and that is our location. It is our already existing infrastructure of highways connecting to a lot of places so that these warehouses can be positioned in a place that makes sense for them. Then they can pay for that. Yeah. You want me to keep going?
So we had, that was air quality was one of the healthcare issues. So we could do maybe two more healthcare issues. I mean, you did the pandemic showing the job. So that help. Anything else you want to say about healthcare at this point?
Air quality too. All of that was just the status quo. Jean Fauci's talking about air quality in 2018, and then we have a respiratory virus come through in 2020. Yeah. So had we had steps taken, had we had someone like her who had her eyes on the ball and knew that was something that we should be focusing on, we would have been that was a rainy day. We would have had an umbrella already in place. Had we talked about air quality and respiratory stuff before it actually came to bear. And we can't let the effects of COVID come in, have effects on us, and then leave and not learn from those effects. We need to have actual lessons that stick around. Would you ask me? Healthcare, women's healthcare.
What other? Okay, if that we can put that for one of the issues. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Women's healthcare. I just interviewed Brian Sims on Monday, and one of my favorite speeches he ever gave was the Pennsylvania legislature was trying to pass bills to create a registry for miscarriages, abortions, ectopic pregnancies. And it was honestly an infringement on women's rights. It was something that wasn't needed. It was a fix to a problem that does not exist. And he gave a very impassioned speech on the floor, and everyone booed him. And he said, your boos mean nothing to me. I see what you're cheering for. And what they were cheering for was the opposite of small government. We do not need that. And so I am unapologetic. Women's healthcare is not up for debate. It is bizarre to me that law was being pushed in a room full of 70% men. And I don't find it magnanimous that us women have to get up and share our difficult stories to be empathized with. I don't think that that's the way that it should be. I think that there's a practicality when women come into positions of power, when they are elected to positions where they can speak for other women, that has an authenticity that's missing right now. And I honestly think that we're in a generation where we will see that shift. I'm optimistic about that because I think that some of that is just habit. Men are just used to making rules for women's body, and they have an entire wish list of things they could control. And it's not the case anymore. So women's issues definitely are very high on the list. And then another practical healthcare, I know this is like a subheading again, is we just had in the last month, maybe 3 weeks, I can't remember when, but everyone in Cumberland County, just about everyone, got an alert that we needed to conserve water, that we needed to make sure that we didn't use water for a while. There was a problem at the plant. I think it was in Silver Spring, if I remember correctly. And in that moment, I was like, we are one alert away from not having clean water. And and even though I didn't have to shift my life drastically, this is not a woe is me story. I didn't wash my car that day. I didn't do dishes. I held off on a load of laundry. We all survived. It wasn't like I don't need a shirt that says survivor. It was fine.
Right.
But it was
yeah.
yes. But it was a moment where I thought, I have never thought about the water plant in Silver Spring Township ever. It affects me every day, but I have never thought about it. And so our water management, just basic water management in Pennsylvania, is underfunded by $322 million. And so we are very close to not having clean water. And that is kind of climate-y, kind of healthcare. And it's just basic. It is basic. The fact that we need to have that pointed out to us is a little appalling. And the fact that no one else is raising a flag saying, hey, please come look at this, is almost inviting disaster to be our moment of problem solving. I don't need to brainstorm in the middle of a disaster. Let's put something in place that's preventative. Again, it's that mindset of being on defense and then moving to offense and actually working towards having something more sustainable.
Awesome. Anything else you want to say about healthcare? In particular?
I mean, my point of reference was my first healthcare ever was Medicaid. And I know people associate that maybe with older people, but that is the healthcare that you all provide to people that are of low income. And so CHIP, I know we hear about CHIP sometimes because CHIP is not automatically funded. They have to vote every several years to keep it funded. And CHIP is healthcare for children. And it is tied to income, but honestly, it covers a ton of children in Pennsylvania. So when you vote Democratic, whenever we talk about welfare or something like that, those things are under there. So if you ever have questions about that, I never mind answering questions about what that was like, because people think having welfare is easy. It is not. It is not easy to get. It is not easy to keep. Sometimes it was easier just to not do it at all and have no healthcare and just kind of cross your fingers. For me, I had a child, so I had a huge amount of practicality kick in where I just had to make sure we always had everything there. But that is what you vote for when you are voting for things. You are voting for actual healthcare, and we want our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, our employees to be healthy. And so making sure that we keep that there. Again, right now, there's no push to take it away. I just don't want to take my eyes off that ball ever.
Awesome. Yeah. Definitely agree with that, being in a public school.
Yes. Yeah.
Working for people every day.
Yeah.
All right. So now climate, which we've sort of touched on because it's all tied together.
Yeah.
And this is, you can like pie in the sky, this kind of thing too. What policies would you create or support to help fight the climate crisis? Obviously, we talked about the subsidizing, like stop the subsidizing and those kinds of, the roads and the cap and trade and all that already a little bit. But if there's anything you wanted to add, and the clean water even goes in here too. But if there's anything else you wanted to add here, feel free to,
Well, this is again the difference between playing defense and saying stop giving away our tax dollars. I don't want my tax dollars to go to subsidizing this a petrochemical plant in Pittsburgh. The offense version of that is if you are here and you are extracting from the ground, you will pay a severance tax. That is a natural resource under the ground owned by Pennsylvanians. And so you will pay to sever that resource from the ground. That severance tax is generally thought of, if we were to implement that in Pennsylvania, to go toward education in particular. So that would be good for what you and I care about. But honestly, at this point, I don't care what it goes towards. There's a fairness in that. There's a practicality in that is bipartisan. I mean, not the support of the actual tax, but the fairness of, if you are going to do this, you need to pay the true cost of doing business in Pennsylvania. If you are going to pollute, you need to pay the true cost. A severance tax is going to help accomplish that. So that, I know the word tax in old school terms would be kind of a dirty word. I don't care. That's exactly what it is. And it's exactly what it is. We pay an occupational tax. We pay tax every day. There's no reason why billion-dollar companies can't pay that as well. And then there's small things. I truly believe in the words climate crisis. And so there's in me a crazy sense of urgency. And I think that's a lot of the younger generations understand this and they protest it and they understand the overwhelming urgency that comes with that. But there's also a duty on us to explain the climate crisis in a way that is palatable and understandable. It is a massively big idea to wrap your mind around. And we have been taught and conditioned mostly by different industries that we somehow through our actions as individuals can help curb that. And while I'm never going to say stop recycling, the main perpetrators of this are big companies. You and I are never going to recycle enough laundry detergent bottles in our lives to stop the climate crisis. So we need to turn our attention to where it belongs, which is the bigger companies. We need to make sure that we put pressure on them. But then there's also ways to introduce the climate crisis, maybe to like our Republican neighbors, that makes sense so that they can understand it and we can earn their trust and their understanding. So right now there's a bipartisan bill called the Right to Repair. And it just means that we would be cutting down on waste. We would be cutting down on waste if we had, say, Apple give more different manufacturers the ability to repair your iPhone rather than you throwing it away and getting a new one. And it's not just that, it's appliances, it's a lot of other big things too. And while again, in the scheme of things, it's probably like a part this big, it's important. It's a stepping stone to making sure that we can make this an understandable and approachable issue for everybody. So if we can highlight stuff like that and show people this is what climate change looks like, it's not taking away your airplanes. We're not going to get rid of hamburgers. We are going to just simply make the world safer, better, and more sustainable. That's where I would go with it. Practical solutions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of small increments too, so that like some of the big stuff, like the companies are the big stuff, but then there's littler stuff that you can do.
Yeah. Well, the education portion is lacking right now. The fact that we are still, like, I just listened to NPR the other day, and on NPR, they said something about the controversy around climate change. And I'm like, stop it, guys. It's not.
a controversy. Yeah.
It's not, but we don't get to choose that. We don't get to choose that for other people. If they have other information that's being told to them, I don't blame them for having the idea that it's not a crisis or that it has different motives.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then, but it even comes up in the classroom, like science teachers often like you get afraid of the pushback or whatever. So it's not taught necessarily in the crisis manner that it maybe should be, because you're too, again, they need that support from outside so that if they are pushed against, they know that they're going to have the backing of the people above them.
Yeah. I mean, imagine, it was 100 years ago, I couldn't have gotten a bank account without a husband. Like I couldn't have run for office. Do you know what I mean? All of that happened in increments. And so we need to, even though there is a push, I think inside of us that understand the crisis to go ahead and do all or nothing solutions. I very much understand the fact that I tend to like John Fetterman. He always says, we're not going to take a coal miner who's 50 years old. Go ahead. I don't, but thank you. I got offered mac and cheese.
Mac and cheese at my house today too.
Right? Yes. He says like, I'm not going to take a 50-year-old coal miner and ask him to learn how to code. It's not practical. We do need to have a one-to-one solution between current jobs and green jobs. That exists already. We can do it, but we need to be very practical about how we're going to get there. Practicality. I also give the example, I work in real estate, and whenever you see the photos of a house and there's like a little description about nestled on a tree-lined street, I write nestled on a tree-lined street, and I write the description. I like to highlight the best parts of my seller's home. If there's natural gas, I write about it because it is coded words to Pennsylvanians that tell them your utilities are going to be economical. And if that's the case, then we need to have very practical solutions where it is going to be incremental. It is going to be incremental with a goal down the road, but we also need to be, again, consistently unapologetic about the actual definition of what we're doing. You're going to lose ground if you can't define the ground that you're on.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So then we are sort of looking at, we sort of touched on this with education, but what is can you think about one policy or act you would like to see implemented to help eliminate systemic inequities? I know, and I think you sort of brought this up a little bit when you were talking about women's rights too, like you were talking about their healthcare and they should be out there. So that would be like an example there too, but if there's anything you wanted to add there as well.
Like here's a good example. Last year I was very new to Facebook. And so for the first month, I would say to my friends, someone posted something, but I don't think they researched it. And they were like, yeah, sweetie, that's not a thing. I was so confused. I was like, why would you do this? But also someone had commented on a very local page. I live in Camp Hill. And someone had posted on a local page something about they heard that in Camp Hill, You used to not be able to sell your house to anyone of color. And a lot of people commented that they had heard that, but they weren't sure. So I pulled out the deed from my house. I have a deed from my house that says you can't sell your house in Camp Hill to anyone of color. In fact, no one can even stay here of color unless they are help, unless they are hired help. And the date of that deed, if I recall, was somewhere in the 1960s. And so I was told by different commenters that I needed to move on. That was a lifetime ago. And I'm like, do you even understand the word lifetime? Maybe if you were already 90 in the 60s, but they progress moves forward, I was told. And I'm like, no, the systemic portion of this is the fact that it is built into the systems. So if your house is on fire, you're going to put out the fire, but then you're going to call insurance, and then you're going to come out and have someone tell you how much damage was done. You're going to put a quantifiable amount on that, and then you're going to actually go through the process of fixing it. So we need to actually address some of these things, again, in an educational, approachable way, so that people understand that they exist, because people do not even agree that there is anything systemic going on. People don't even agree that inequalities exist unless they see them. A good example of this is voter ID. When I knock on doors, I am basically talking mostly to very friendly, receptive Democrats. And even Democrats think that voter ID makes sense inherently, because it does. They have never been a person with any barriers between them and voting. The first time I ever voted, I didn't vote. I drove to the polling place. I had worked a double shift. I had a baby in the back of my seat, in the back of my car, in a car seat. And I got outside the polling place and I didn't know what to do inside, so I left. And so that barrier was there. That was just a lack of knowledge that kept me from voting. I had an ID. The privilege was mine to have that. And back then that wasn't even an idea, all those years ago. But those are barriers. Even if this only affects 700,000 people, which is the generally accepted idea of how many people don't have voter ID in Pennsylvania, let's say that we get almost every one of those fixed. What if 10,000 of them don't? You have disenfranchised 10,000 people with voter ID. So again, I hate for the solution to be education, but if we can't even agree about where we are, that is a failing on our part. That is a failing on our part. And I'm not saying we should stop everything and have fights on the internet with people about deeds. I'm not saying that we should stop everything and make sure that we try to convince people that maybe have already made up their mind, maybe people who are committed to not being convinced. But we need to make sure that we've at least done enough education that people understand what's there. And
frankly, yeah, that was in the deed 50 years ago, but it has affected the Black community in Camp Hill, right? It's still
what's the opposite?
Right.
Yes.
Like they can't, like, because they couldn't buy houses 50 years ago, you don't have families who have been in the community, and like that's that's it.
So we removed the racism, but you don't ever, what example do we have of someone introducing something into a deed that is the opposite of what just happened? Right. There isn't a such thing. So while we have removed things, again, it's putting out a fire in your kitchen and never redoing your kitchen. How are you going to make dinner? You have evidence that something happened, and the danger is gone, but you obviously would be calling the insurance agency. You would be designing a new kitchen with that blank. You'd be, such an old example, but all of those things would be going into place, and we don't have that. We haven't done any of that. And so again, I think education is going to be huge, because I think that as a privileged white person, I had to find out a lot of that stuff on my own or by happenstance. And so I think if we had cohesive messaging, it would help people understand. There are going to be some fights, I think, that are worth it. Like voter ID, I think, is a fight that's well worth it, because it hasn't happened yet. And again, that's an example of losing ground. We'd be losing ground. And like the child care credit, that's a good example of having gained ground and people like it. It's going to be very hard to take that away because people like it. The same could happen with voter ID in the opposite direction, where people get used to it. They don't see that problem. It is hidden in a different section of the state. And so they don't worry about it.
Right.
But we could easily lose an estimated, people usually say like 10%. Let's say we lose 10% of the people. We get 90% of the people who currently don't have voter ID. We get them ID. That's 70,000 people. What was the voter margin of between Joe Biden and Trump? I forgot his name. Ooh, that's a good sign.
If only we could all just forget it.
Right. Even for a moment. What a great moment that was.
Yeah.
That's the margin. That was the margin of victory. We would, that's intentional. Yeah. We're not stumbling into that number.
No, right. Very much so. All right. Last question that I have is about immigrant rights. What would you like to see happen to ensure immigrants' rights? You talked about the caravan earlier, and stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah. So one of my best friends, her name is Hajir Al Sheikh. I won't plug her book, but it is right there. She was from the Sudan. She
Pull it out.
yes. Oh
Yeah,
my
go
God, she's
ahead.
gonna be mortified.
That's all right.
She lives in Hampton.
We gotta
She li-
educate ourselves, right?
Yes, Hajir lives in Hampton Township. She's been a citizen here for quite many years. She's an entrepreneur. She gives speeches everywhere. She has really taken all the things that have happened to her, which honestly run the gamut of horrors, and turn them into positivity. And when you meet her, you will leave just beaming. I was in a room with her the other day, a room full of wholly accomplished people, and people flocked to her because she just has an aura of giving. She will give. 2 weekends ago, she came into contact with someone who was in a domestic violence situation. I'll say I helped her, and a lot of people that answered her Facebook posts helped her, but she collected car seats, baby things, did supplies. She bought tickets for this family, got them to shelter. I mean, just anyway, that's an immigrant. Hunter's an immigrant. She is just the most beautiful addition to our family, but she went from being a refugee to an immigrant to being a beautiful gem of a person in our community. So we need to make sure that we're paying attention throughout that whole process. And to do that as a singular person, I think is understandably very difficult, and something that we just don't have time for. So my solution is to always give credence, give deference, and give resources to the places that are doing it well. So Hajir has a good experience, and I have interviewed them as well. The people at CWS in Lancaster. Lancaster is a huge hub for people to come in, and they help them. They help them understand the culture, the things that we take for granted. Me not understanding Facebook, take that confusion and times it by 1,000. Like this, not understanding the grocery store, not understanding, different customs. If they go to New Jersey, can they pump their gas? Things we take for granted. So if you have somewhere that's a really good resource, keep giving them resources. Hajir went through, actually, when she was a refugee, she went from the Sudan to Egypt. She went through a less than reputable place. And while we were all giving our money altruistically here in America, it never got to them. It never got to any refugees. So they had a slim chance of becoming immigrants and actually making it here. So when you find somewhere good, like Lancaster, Philly, Bucks County, all of those places, go ahead and make sure you're giving them resources. And then I guess a kind of a broad solution too is different places like Philadelphia, even Harrisburg, they don't participate with ICE detainees. They don't participate with anything like that. And so again, that's kind of hidden unless that's part of your day-to-day life. You're not going to think about it. But when you hear the word sanctuary cities on the news, they're talking about very real things to very real people.
Yeah. And I know, and then in Pennsylvania, we have the whole issue of Berks, which the detention center, which I know is going through some changes finally, but like that took some time to, and that took a global pandemic, for them to try to do anything there too.
And that's, I think too, and I am not the bearer of this to see this through, but I think that when we elect people, we need to also be choosing issues. Like my issues are typically a $15 minimum wage and LGBT protections. We need to be choosing issues, one, that we can win, two, that we can show people. We can start a cycle of gratification where we say, here's what I'm going to do. You do it, and then you show them that you did it. And then they feel like they are being heard, they're participating. And then that gets civic engagement up. That's going to help every person that's in office. Because let's say I'm not elected, I then become a very informed voter, and I want to see whoever is elected go through that process as well. So whenever we are choosing things on a national scale, like, hey, let's not put kids in cages, we need to make sure that the people are actually following through with it, because it is a nationwide demoralizing event whenever that's a campaign promise and it doesn't come true. We stop participating. And then we get a new generation of people that don't believe in politicians.
Right. Voting is just the beginning. It's not the end result.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. And then that was my last official question, but you just touched on your two big points. And so I wanted to make sure you get to say more about those if you want to, like the $15 minimum wage and LGBTQ rights. So if there's other, if you have something you want to say about either of those things, feel free to, if those are your main points, then I'd like to touch on those too.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, $15 minimum wage, a living wage is required. I know a lot of Democrats whose doors I knocked on, they had very hoity-toity ideas of the systemic things that we can change to help people get out of poverty. And my solution is pay people. Like that's a very millennial thing.
Yeah.
Pay me.
Okay.
I know that as a millennial, when I was in my 20s, I would sometimes interview at different places for a job, and they'd say, "We have beanbag chairs and we have vending machines." I'm like, "What's your pay?"
Yeah.
Like this is real. Like I'm an adult now. We need to make sure we're paying people. So a living wage is going to be life changing for people. It's going to be life changing for people in our district, and it's not just teenagers working at their first job. It's veterans. It's going to be people who have jobs after they've retired. It's going to be people on fixed incomes who have to go out and have another job to supplement. It's going to be people like me. I was making almost $15 minimum wage 15 years ago, and I talk about the poverty I lived in. It matters. It is going to be a life-changing thing for Pennsylvanians in general, but people in the 87th district too. There's no reason why we can't do that. If a business can't survive paying a living wage, then we need to focus more about what that business, the issues are, because paying people is not a controversial thing. We need our employees and our neighbors to be healthy and successful and taken care of. And then leading into that, Pennsylvania, I think we all assume that people are protected in Pennsylvania with their gender identity or their sexual orientation. And while that's true, like in the 87th district, there is an ordinance in Camp Hill Borough that protects that. There's actually in Pennsylvania, there's a patchwork of small ordinances, but that's not good enough. If that's the case, one, it triggers and it should show to you that there is an interest for this to be statewide. Go ahead and do it. But it also shows you that we're pretty close. I'm not reinventing the wheel by asking for this. I don't actually have to go in there on day one and reinvent legislation. It already exists. And we have almost passed it by thin margins every time, but it's been going on for 18 years to have that be something that is statewide in Pennsylvania, that you can't fire someone for being gay. You cannot evict someone even for a perceived gender identity thing that you just don't like. And right now that's completely illegal. It is legal to discriminate against people for those reasons in Pennsylvania. So again, give people issues that are going to be immediately impactful. It's going to keep people safer. It's going to make them more healthy, going to make them more successful. And then also show that we can get things done, because I think that we are so close to that. We just need to elect more Democrats in the state house in particular.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Anything else you want to add here? I think
no, it's always weird talking about what you think for like an hour.
You got it. You got it down though. I appreciate it. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks. The members of CVR, thank you. And we'll definitely hopefully reach some of your voters.
You guys are the only ones to ask me any of those questions. Out of all the interviews, I mean, people will ask kind of general questions. Your questions are specific, and so when you give specific answers, because sometimes people they want to ask things that matter to them, and so I could obviously tell that those things matter to you. So that was really, really nice. You guys asked really good questions, so I'm glad. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think we can stop the recording if you need to.
Okay. Yeah, and then I will stop.